So welcome to everybody who's attending. I see there's already quite a number of people who joined us. So while we wait for everybody to join, let us start by welcoming Frederick to our dialogue today. We're very excited to have him here. So Frederick, really thank you for taking your time to come and join us and discuss things with us. And today's title is very exciting because we're talking about complexity in transdisciplinary research, creativity, serendipity, and the future of academia. And I think it's going to be a very interesting, very creative discussion, a little bit away from the historical development of TD, maybe with a little bit of a flair bringing in by the creativity idea, and thinking about the future of research, because if we really become strong, we might just change academia, hopefully in a positive way. So welcome, and welcome to Neeraj Mistry. He's going to have, he's becoming our face for transdisciplinary dialogues. He's got just this flair to make us all relax and laugh and have a good conversation. So Neeraj, thank you so much for helping me host this. And let me just introduce Frederick a little bit more formally. Frederick is an associate professor at the University of Geneva, Faculty of Psychology and Educational Studies. He's the head of the Inter- and Transdisciplinarity Unit within the Interfaculty Center for the Rights of the Child, and the Deputy Director of the Center for Children's Rights Studies. So being very involved with children, I was very interested in when we met each other online to our first discussion, and Frederick just mentioned something that just grabbed me, and that was to say, we need to become like children again when we do our research, because that curiosity and that creativity gets lost through the schooling system. And I love that idea. I keep on watching children move with a bit more interest now, and to see how they interact and the freedom of just exploring things so unfettered by all kinds of hang-ups. So it's wonderful. So I'm going to hand over to the two of you, and I really look forward to our discussion. So thank you very much, Frederick, again for joining us.
Esther, thanks so much. And let me give a warm welcome to all our participants who've joined in, and also to let everyone know that the session will be recorded. And so they can send the link around to those who can't make it, and they can watch it asynchronously. And so Hester, the point you raise is so interesting, because transdisciplinarity is about a form of learning. We often talk about it as an approach. And in order to learn, it's quite interesting that we almost have to unlearn certain things that has sort of made us think in a particular way. And so how do we create those enabling environment for creativity and expansion of thought and working with different perspectives? So that's the really exciting thing that we have to deal with. And we are really honored to have Frederick here on the call, and his research and the extent to which he's covered the field is phenomenal to sort of bring everything together and help create that context. So welcome, Frederick. We're so happy to have you here. Let's start off with, are you unmuted, right?
No.
Oh, okay, excellent. We can hear you. So Frederick, we usually start off our dialogues by understanding our esteemed guest's journey. And so please tell us about your journey into transdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary research.
Yes. And firstly, I just want to thank you, Neeraj and Hester and all the network of Future Africa to welcome me in this so interesting network. And also, I discovered that transdisciplinarity is not only the preoccupation in Europe, but also around the world. And it's also interesting for me to connect some different communities on inter and transdisciplinarity around the world. So thank you very much to invite me and to also give me the opportunity to talk about not only, as you say, Hester, not only transdisciplinarity, but also about other approaches that are connected to transdisciplinarity, like a creativity, the so interesting concept of serendipity, and so on. So thank you very much for this invitation. And you asked me about my journey in inter and transdisciplinarity, and it was also for me the occasion to think about my own academic trajectory. So I work on the academic trajectory in my research. For example, when I'm interested about the interdisciplinarians and the transdisciplinarians and how they work, but I apply also this to myself, and I go back in my academic past, and I think that I was from the beginning interesting about this transdisciplinary approach. But at the beginning, I wasn't talking about transdisciplinarity, but I start by studying in different disciplinary background. I start with some academic training in linguistics, discourse analysis, communication studies, the story of arts, aesthetics of cinema, and so on. So I have a background in humanities, and from the beginning, I was very interested to learn and to unlearn, as you say, right, in different areas, in different disciplines. So I think that I was born as a transdisciplinarian, perhaps, and I was also interested at the beginning of my academic career about the theory of complexity, and it was interesting for me to think from the beginning in different disciplines, across different disciplines, and over the academic boundaries. I was very interested about very diverse perspective and diverse disciplines. And finally, I think I've cultivated this openness, this open mind during my academic trajectory, and step by step, year after year, I become a sort of, I love to say that I am a specialist of unspeciality, of undiscipline. So I try to unlearn all day. I learn about transdisciplinarity, I know about it, but I try to be ignorant about a lot of things, and to cultivate the curiosity in different disciplines, different way of thinking, different scientific communities, different cultures. So I think it's also a message to the participants, to the global community, that we can be specialized in academia, in a disciplines, or also in transdisciplinary studies, but we must also be open, and to be open to other perspectives. So I think we will talk about this during this conversation. Thank you for this.
Excellent. And I think, you know, the foundational basis, it starts off with curiosity, right? And it's about people sort of being curious about different avenues and ways of thinking about a problem or an issue. But there's something that you raised that's really also something I've been grappling with, is a transdisciplinary lens or that expansive view something that's innate, that people are born with, or is it something that can be acquired? And I think it's quite analogous to the nature versus nurture debate that has, you know, plagued us for decades. And I think we're landing on somewhere that it's a combination of both. So I wanted to sort of put that back to you, and what were your thoughts on that? and if along the way there were any epiphanies or eureka moments when you had a sudden realization when it comes to these sorts of balances and approaches.
Yes. So just it's interesting what you say. I think we are not born as an interdisciplinarian or transdisciplinarian, but perhaps we have all this sort of curiosity, interest for the others, and so on. And I think that our community can help to cultivate this aptitude, this ability to think differently. And it's why I teach on transdisciplinarity. I teach at different level, from the master's to PhD school and so on. So we can become more and more inter and transdisciplinary, transdisciplinarian finally. So we are not predetermined to be disciplinarian or transdisciplinarian. We can evolve ourselves alone and also in connection with the others in this perspective. And of course, I don't know if I discover some eureka moments, but I talk about the theory of complexity, and that for me a great discovery during my lectures when I began my academic training. And also I think we talk about, I think, serendipity, but for me, it was very interesting to discover this concept, because it's a concept who was not very known in the transdisciplinary approach. But it was for me an eureka moment, in the sense that it was an unpredictable phenomenon for me. And I tried in different publications and project to put this concept in the area of transdisciplinarity. So I think it's an example for me of an eureka moment, and I invite all the day myself and my colleagues to be open to this potential eureka moment in our academic trajectories, but also in our lives. So it's interesting to me to be open to these epiphanic moments.
And that's very interesting. And I want to dive into that a bit more, because I find this a fascinating area. And I want to reflect on when I was working in pharmaceutical research and development and partnerships, something that a CEO of a pharmaceutical company had said, which was really interesting, because when you think about drug development, it feels like a very linear process to discover a drug. But he said drug discovery is a serendipitous process, you know, and so given the links that complexity, that transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary research has to complexity science, and with that emergence, what are your thoughts on how we reconcile serendipity and intentionality when we're doing ITD research and applying those approaches?
Yes, I think that the inter and transdisciplinary approach is particularly interesting domain to think about this reconciliation between intentionality, or I like to talk about programmatic vision of research, and the unpredictable moment in the research process. And of course, because I also teach about research methods, so I'm right at the right place to see that we need to give to our students or to the young researchers, for example, we need to give them some methods, tools, and some very controlled process to do research. So it, for me, the programmatic view of research, so is, as you say, a linear process, but in the same time, we must train them to be open to the unexpected. And that's the idea of serendipity, because the serendipity is the the art to discover what we don't was looking for. So it's the place of the hazard, the uncertainty in the research process. So we have to deal with this tension between a predictable process and an unpredictable dimension in our research process. And I think that the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research process is particularly interesting in this perspective. And I try in my own research project, and also with my students or with my PhD students, to welcome them in the space of serendipity, and to be as the pastor said, the hazard is benefit only to people who are open to it. En français, it's le hasard ne favorise que les esprits préparés. We have to be prepared to work and our life, and I think that it's a
Oh, Frederick, I think you're cutting out. Frederick, can you hear me? Hester, we're gonna try and get Frederick back. I think we just lost his feed.
Yes, I think he just left to just log on again. I think that will solve the problem. So we'll just wait a few minutes. So we are now in a moment of serendipity, as we discussed. We'll just
Absolutely.
have to be patient.
Which is comforting to know for us as South Africans that we are not the only ones with bandwidth and electricity issues. It tends to happen to our colleagues all over the world. And I just want to say, I was looking at the participant list, and we have quite a wide range of colleagues from across the globe and across various parts of Africa. So I think it's certainly the enabling environment for diverse thought. Let's see if we can get Frederick back. In the meantime, should we see if we can field a few questions and I can jot them down, Lerato?
Yes, there is one question from Anne Leonard about the NRF ranking system that requires specific discipline. I can maybe just jump in a little bit that the NRF has been really trying to promote TD research. So they are very, very aware of the problem of, the system that still doesn't speak to this, though their requirements for funding very often requires a TD approach. So it is a dilemma, but it's not ignored, it's being addressed. Ah, Frederick is back. Great. Welcome.
Hi, Frederick. Can you hear us now?
Yes, there was a bug.
Yeah,
no?
We can hear you and we can see you now.
Okay. It was from my side or not?
I think it was from your side because we were all still on here.
Okay. So
We lost you when you had just given us a French quote on serendipity and emergence.
Yes, yes. It was a quote of Pasteur. Very shortly, I think that this concept of serendipity is very useful for the transdisciplinary community, and I invite the participants also to read about it and to think about the manner to implement this concept in their own research project, because I think it's a very fascinating approach for us.
So I want to expand that on that a bit, and I think you touched on it when you were talking about relating to your students and the teaching that you do. And the point I want to address is, how do we create that enabling environment for serendipity? Because sometimes even when it happens, people are so focused on their work, they don't notice it or observe it. So we need to create the environment, but we also have to be receptive to it. And so not just in academia, but also with the extended stakeholder community, which is what we talk about often with transdisciplinary work. And what are those qualities and that we need to pay attention to in order to enable that and accept it?
Yes. So I think, as you say, it's very important to not just to say you must be open to serendipity, to the students, to the researchers, who are also to the stakeholders, but to create some space and time to favorize this sort of new approach in our transdisciplinary research project. And I think that we need some material space to do that, so infrastructure, and to be in a more open space in the different space that in which we can connect together, on not only between academics, but also with, as you say, with different stakeholders. And it's not also only a question of infrastructure, it's also a question of values, attitude, and of methods to do. And I at the necessity to create some trusty space in the different spaces in which the people are agree, and they can authorize themselves to be open to the unexpected. So I try to work, for example, with my students on this idea of a trusty space and moment, and we try to engage them in this process at the beginning of the training. And we also favorize the participation on not only from the students, but also from people outside the academia. And we try to explore this idea of participation in the sense that for us, the participation is not only the consultation of people, but it's the idea that the people can co-produce with us some scientific concepts, or also some methods, and so on. So we try to go from consultation to this great idea of participation in a way of knowledge co-production, because we talk about the importance. And for example, center in children's rights studies, we do research with the people who are concerned by our research projects. And specifically the children. So we give a place to the children in our research process, in a strong participation way of thinking and doing research. And it's for us, it's very important to give the voice to the people in this context, the children who are concerned by these different problematic in our interfaculty center. So I think that we need some space to do that. We need some values, some process, some methods, and so on. And I think we try to be part of these different experiences around the world in which we try to connect the scientific community with the people outside of the academia.
So I think there's a catalyst in your program, which is the fact that you work with children, right? And when you're working with children, there needs to be that openness, there needs to be the simplicity of language that's used in a way that everyone understands. And I think that's a really, really important lesson, because when you look at the language that is used between disciplines, I mean, sometimes we don't understand each other when we speak across disciplines, let alone the extended stakeholder community, civil society, government, nonprofits, etc. But I think it's also really important that there is the broker. It's the person that goes between the disciplines and the sectors. And we did have a conversation about this previously, these boundary workers that go between. And I think it's really interesting because they fit everywhere, and yet they don't fit anywhere. And they straddle between having imposter syndrome in a particular discipline and yet being the gel that goes between those, which opens them to a lot of vulnerability. And so what can the research community do to enable and promote these sorts of boundary workers who are key to finding transdisciplinary solutions?
Yes. So thank you to point that, because you're right. There is a lot of manner to talk about these new profiles, these new peoples who are at the interface between the disciplines and between the academia and the non-academic world. And you talk about the brokers, but also the catalysts. We also can talk about the translators. You talk about languages, and they try to create some dialogical space between the disciplines and between the people, the different people in academia and outside the academia. And I think that these different profiles are very important to give more success to our transdisciplinary research project, because we are now training some new generation of people who are sometimes near that sort of new profiles, these new people who work at the boundaries. But in the same time, we must give a place to these people in our different scientific communities, because as you know, our universities are based on the disciplinary organization, and we must give a place to this new sort of researchers. As you know, we talk about the T-shaped researcher in sometimes some people who have a disciplinary background, but they have also some transversal competencies to connect the people and connect different disciplines. And I think that actually the great challenge is, as I say, to give a place to these people in our scientific communities, to valorize them, and not to give them a subordinate place. You know, I think that they have also they must have a chance to be, for example, at some professorships places and so on. And I think perhaps I'm a sort of an example of this sort of people, because I am professor in inter and transdisciplinary studies. So we can be specialized of this sort, this new manner of thinking and practice, research and teaching and so on. So, but I think we have a lot of job now to give the place to these people, and particularly to the young researchers that are now interesting about inter and transdisciplinarity, and they want to develop this approach in their PhD trajectory and so on. And I think that we and the universities have the responsibility to think about this way of embedding these profiles in our different academic areas.
I just want to inform the participants that please feel free to put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Then we also will give an opportunity for people to raise their hand to ask questions. But I just want to build on that point, and I like that T-shaped pattern where there's the transversal aspect or the context in which the very vertical deep research happens. And I also like what I'm hearing is a specialized generalist, so to speak, and it's almost a cult or a tribe that we're developing. But with those sorts of combination of generalization and specialization in that T-shaped pattern and in boundary workers, what might, if you could creatively imagine, what might a vision of future universities look like? And we'll certainly have our monodisciplinary work, but in terms of taking on big challenges in a creative work, in a creative way, what might that look like in the future?
Thank you for this question, because sometimes I think that we are so preoccupied by the present and the past, and we don't take the time to think about the future. But the future is perhaps more important sometimes that we think about. We talk about also the children, and I think that they are our futures. We must think about the future of our academic institution for our children also, not only for us. And I think that, and I wrote also some papers on that, we must try to think about different scenarios about the future of the academia. And for example, we can think about, it's perhaps one scenario. We can think that the disciplinary universities they will be all the time disciplinary in the future, because we sometimes also can observe that there are some people or colleagues who come back from the idea of interdisciplinarity, for example. They rely on their own disciplinary background. They don't want to engage themselves in the transdisciplinary way, for example. So it's a risk, I think, that the disciplinarity will come back very strongly, and will kill the creativity of transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. It's a possibility. I'm not agree with that, but perhaps it's a possible scenario. And a second scenario can be, I talk about the incremental university. The idea that the university will transform themselves during the future years, step by step. And we develop some interdisciplinary programs. we can, as I said, to favorize the interdisciplinary profile and the brokers at the frontier of disciplines and so on. And it will be a progressive transformation of the university without disruptive way of thinking. And we can also think about a war, I think, a sort of war university in which the disciplinarians are in conflict with inter and transdisciplinarians. And so, sometimes it's already an actuality because we fight together about the resources, about the power in our universities and so on. And there is a great tension between the disciplinarians and the inter and transdisciplinarians. And for me, the risk is to collapse the system, you know, because the war is not a good way, not only for the disciplinarian, but also for the inter and transdisciplinarian. So I think it's not a good perspective, but we fight all the day for what we want to be in the academia. So it's a possible scenario. And I love also the perspective of we sometimes use the concept of symbiotic university. In a peaceful university in which the disciplinarian coexists with the inter and transdisciplinarians, and there is a virtual circle between disciplinarity and inter and transdisciplinarity. So it's the idea that we can coexist in the same system and cross-fertilize our ideas, methods, and so on. So it's also an interesting perspective, I think, for the future. And perhaps in a more provocative way, we can think about a post-disciplinary university. Perhaps not in a short term, but in a long term. What will be the university in 15 years or more? And perhaps the idea of the disciplinarity will be absent, and we must think about a university structure who is constructed on the ruins of disciplines. So we have to think a very disruptive systems without a disciplinary organization of knowledge, but we have to think about an utopian university in which the knowledge is really co-produced between different specialists, people, stakeholders, and so on. But I think it's provocative, but it's also interesting to think a very disruptive systems, because it's also a manner to help us to change the actual system.
So that's excellent, and I think it addresses the question that Danny raised in the question and answer box, and I just want to draw on a few words. One is the symbiotic university and how they coexist, and the embedding of transdisciplinary lenses, approaches, processes within the university environment and the interaction between them. I also love the idea of the post-disciplinary university and something we can sort of envision in the future in a much more expansive way. But I want to draw on a question that Poppy has raised in the question and answer section, because ultimately, and this links to some of the work I've been exploring, which is the heart of the matter with transdisciplinarity, where it's relational and it's emotional and it's how we feel about each other and work together, or either enables or hinders the work together. And so her question is, can you share details about some of the techniques that you use to help people unlearn the disciplinary siloed way of thinking, and also any techniques that you've used to help people broaden their views and ways of working together? And that, you know, boils down to that human interactional engagement.
Yes. about the unlearning, for example, with my students, when I give my course, I propose a new pedagogical contract. And I said, I'll explain there to my students that I know a lot about inter and transdisciplinarity, but I'm sure that the students have some experiences and some academic or experience and background, and they can use that different backgrounds to think about, for example, the concept of transdisciplinarity. And I try to engage them in a more inductive process. And I use, for example, some techniques from the creativity studies. As you know, for example, some brainstorming session. I try also with the divergent thinking and so on. And we try to generate together a lot of ideas, perception, representation about what can transdisciplinarity be and so on. And I try to create a trusty space between us and to engage them in the process. And just after I give my knowledge on, for example, the concept of transdisciplinarity. And for me, it's fascinating to observe that they know, in fact, they know a lot about what can transdisciplinarity be and what transdisciplinarity is. But I think that the teachers just I think they must be agreed to give the place to the participant and to get out of comfort zone finally, because I know a lot, but I don't know everything about transdisciplinarity, and I think that the students, or my PhD students, for example, or advanced researchers, are some of partners in these discussions and not only learners. So I try to consider them as learners, but also as unlearners, and me also as an unlearner, you know. So I think it's a different posture that we can have when we try to create that sort of trusty space. And also, for example, I favorize collective intelligence process, collaborative process. And I use, for example, perhaps you participate, for example, to a World Cafe one time. And I try to use this methodology of the World Cafe in my pedagogical device. And we try to be more iterative, integrative in our discussion. So it's very connected with what I said about the participation. So for me, it's not just a slogan, it's a reality. And we try to do that day after day.
I think that's very helpful. And for many of the TD colleagues on this call, some of us participated in a workshop with the TD Collaboratory, and they are in the final stages of producing a workbook that has all these tools. And once available, we will certainly share it among our listservs. But I want to also look at a couple of questions. One's a really big question, so I'm going to save that for the next one. But on to this point, what sort of training do we need to offer academics and teachers in this environment to promote this sort of work? It's clearly a new level of training they require in that facilitation brokerage, but also being much more emotionally aware and enhancing that empathy and emotional intelligence in them. And with that, how do we measure success of these outcomes or keep track on progression? I don't want to charge it with success or failure, but rather progression in some sort of way.
So, yes, I think that this emotional dimension is very important. And of course, we work on this aspect, and we are very inspired by different pedagogical experiences that they come from. It's not really actually, but in the past, if you think about the Education Nouvelle, the new education, think about Montessori, Freinet, and so on, all these pedagogists who think about the child, for example, at the center of the learning process, and so on. And we work actually on these alternative pedagogies, and there is a great place for emotion, tolerance, empathy, and so on. And my challenge is to help, for example, my colleagues or the PhD students to be open to these different dimensions, because for example, empathy is not only a value, a humanist value. It's a real practical device, because in interdisciplinary dialogue, for example, I need to understand the other point of view, and I must have the capacity to be at the place of my colleagues, for example. So it's a very essential dimension in the interdisciplinary dialogue, I think. Yeah.
I think that's really, really helpful. And I have to say, I'm so impressed by the questions that are coming in. And I want to sort of point to my team that we should find a way of continuing the conversation with these questions and have a to and fro online via email, or we create that platform for it. But the really big question is, and I'm paraphrasing some of the inputs that touched on this theme, is that from an African philosophical point of view, and a large part of the participation and the audience for this dialogue is from the African context, the African philosophy is much more holistic in its thinking. And the academic path that we followed is very much a Western construct of disciplines. And we have an amazing opportunity now to reconcile both. And I think you epitomize that openness of that collaboration to say, how do we be open to figure out ways, and then together with the point that you raised is, what is the purpose of all of this in service of the communities around us and the impact on society in that sort of way? So how do we bridge this world of divides across disciplines from the North and the South, Western and African philosophical approaches? And big question, but your thoughts on how we approach this?
It's a big, in the encyclopedia, the new encyclopedia in transdisciplinarity, I also try to not only be open to, for example, the idea of creativity, serendipity, and so on, in a very scientific way of thinking, but I also include some South perspective, because I think that we must, as you say, have a more global perspective. And for example, there is an interesting entry on decolonizing transdisciplinarity. And I love the idea that this approach is not only a Western approach, more perhaps disciplinary based, but it's also the idea that we can include now more and more the perspective of the South, and not in only in a ideal way of thinking, but very practically. For example, I think about, for example, to the indigenous methodologies and so on. And I'm very interested about the new, I think it's a new alliance between these different cultures and scientific cultures. And I also, it's an opportunity of a progression for inter and transdisciplinary studies to include this different way of thinking from for example, from Africa and so on and so on. And for example, there is another entry on the oceanic. I discovered this new field of studies, and it's so interesting to see that above our differences, I think we share some common values, common ethical point of view about research and about the necessity to think outside the academia and so on. So I'm very interested now to connect, to help to connect these different communities.
Frederick, you cut out there for a moment. Can you say what that community is again?
Sorry?
Can you say again what that community is that you talked about? We've lost Frederick again. I think he's gonna reconnect or log on again. Hester, do you have any questions or want to respond to any of the questions from the group?
Yes, I think something that's coming through in the chat section, and both of them, is actually this, you know, the need that's coming up for finding the African identity in this approach. And I really love those questions, and I think we need to have a dialogue just around the epistemological variety and scope that comes into play when we do have a TD approach. So I will make it my task to bring everybody together to discuss that specific aspect, because African thinking and doing is very much TD. And, you know, it's been really captured by the disciplines. We need to recapture it in a way.
Absolutely. I think we have Frederick back, but it does remind me of a quote from Steve Biko from one of his speeches, where he talked about us as Africans and the envisioned self. What is it that we see for ourselves collectively and individually across the continent, and how do we sort of promote that? Frederick, can you hear me? Hester, do you want to see if there's any other questions you want to touch on while we try and connect with Frederick?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm sorry, I don't know what's the problem.
So we are also coming close to time, and I want to see if there's any other questions on the chat, and if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question.
Sorry for the cuts, huh?
Oh, it's all right. It happens, and we can shift gears here.
It's also the serendipity in this conversation. And we will do that with this unpredictable phenomenon.
So I do have a last question, and then I want to leave a couple of minutes for Hester to wrap up the session. But my last question to you, Frederick, is if you had two wishes for the transdisciplinary space, what would they be?
I think that the first wish is regarding all we discussed together about the different challenges of inter and transdisciplinarity in academia, the importance to give the place and the voice to the people outside the academia, regarding also the place that we want to give to the people who are in between the disciplines and so on. I think that it's now very important that we share some values of dialogue, tolerance, intercomprehension between the people from different disciplines, cultures, and so on. So I think it's very important to point that, because I think that sometimes we are so under pressure to perform in academia that we lost finally the essential. So I think that for me it's a very insocial perspective. And the second point is it's in the same way. It's the idea that we must try to decolonize our different manner to think about inter and transdisciplinarity, and to work around the world in between our different communities who works on inter and transdisciplinarity, because there are different networks around the world, different associations, different centers which work on these approaches. And my dream is about a very global community without killing the difference between us.
Oh, I'm choking up at that comment. You know, I mean, this is us just being better human beings to start off with, right? And acknowledge our global interconnectivity in that sort of way. Frederick, a pleasure, an absolute pleasure, and so honored to have had this conversation. Hester, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Thank you for giving us so much information and inspiration, and probably a few solutions and a few challenges, which is good. I always try to bring in the whole aspect of care, you know, how we must take care of each other, be careful. And I think if we have that as a principle in our approach to research, it also changes the dynamics. There's also the aspect that I cannot resist to mention of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, you know, the volatile world we live in, both from climate change aspect to societies that are under turmoil. And if you keep that in mind and you plug in your own research into this bigger overview picture of our planet, it does give you a feeling of a bit of responsibility and urgency in what we do, and make us realize we can't continue the way that we have been doing up to now. So thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. I'm sure there will be many other colleagues who will go back to this to refer to aspects that you mentioned. And thank you again from everybody here at Future Africa for accepting our invitation. We're really privileged to have hosted you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, the relevant, very relevant questions, and thank you to all the participants. And I wish you individually, collectively, full of success in your projects and life. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederick. Take care, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And thank you to the Future Africa team and Hester for leading this work.